So our core calling as Christians, as those who seek to follow in the ways of Jesus, our core calling is the same today as it was yesterday, and it's the same as it will be tomorrow. Regardless of our circumstances in life, and faithful followers of Jesus have lived their calling through every kind of circumstance through the years. Regardless of the political situation in one's society, regardless of who is in power or who is not in power, regardless of whether one is living in a democracy or a monarchy or a theocracy or a tyranny or anarchy, and faithful followers of Jesus have lived their calling through every kind of society. Regardless of one's economic circumstances, regardless of wealth or poverty, regardless of whether one is among the majority or among the minority, whether one's religion is being persecuted or is doing the persecuting, has been corrupted by power or is among the powerless, regardless of our circumstances of freedom or captivity, of war or peace, of safety or peril, or comfort or precarity, regardless of being among friends or among strangers or among enemies, followers of Jesus of every time and every age have one prime directive: to love God with our whole selves and to love others as ourselves. And as followers of Jesus, we must let our lives be defined by this directive, and let our choices be derived from this directive, whatever the circumstances of our lives, and as those circumstances change. And this charge reminds us of who we are and helps us to know how to be and what to do. To love God with our whole selves and to love others as ourselves. This calling can serve as a touchstone, especially in times of uncertainty, of upheaval or conflict, of fear or anger or mistrust, where forces of personalities other than Jesus may be trying to define for us who we are and how we should be and how we should treat each other. This prime directive is countercultural, and it always has been, and it will continue to be. It cuts against a lot of what the culture around us wants to tell us about who we are and how we should treat other people. It cuts against a lot of our internal culture as well, our kind of inner sense of self and other. Following Jesus is countercultural because sin is real. And now in our church, such as it is, we often don't use this S word because of how it's been used to cause shame, to cause belittlement, and on, right? Some of us are in recovery from religious communities that's used the S word to shame and belittle. But it's urgently important to take sin seriously and to allow ourselves to kind of learn and be tutored by a deeper wisdom that's in this inheritance of ours. There's a strong tendency within societies and within us as individuals towards selfishness, towards abusiveness and scapegoating and negligence of others, and of pettiness and bitterness and vindictiveness and violence. I could go on and on. This is what the prophets call hardness of heart. Let not your heart be hardened, but they sure can. These are all symptoms of a deeper disease that we can call sin, which is being profoundly out of alignment, out of joint with our true natures as God has created us to be. And our job as followers of Jesus always is to diagnose this with clarity and maturity and humility and grace, and to seek healing from sin through God's grace, as Jesus made abundantly clear. And what Jesus does is remind us that this does not define us. We're all very susceptible to what we can call sin, and it can be very distressing to see it clearly and to feel the suffering that it can cause. But sin does not define us. Our true selves are free from it in God's love. And being true to our true selves means living like it. So this is our prime directive, which we keep returning to over and over again, to love God with our whole selves, because through Christ we know that our whole selves belong to God, and God is one. And to love others as ourselves, because through Christ we know that they also belong to God, as we do, and that we belong to others, and they belong to us in love. God help us. And this is no mere platitude. It can sound nice, but it really is a defining challenge of our faith in whatever our circumstances. It's easy to worship Jesus. It's something else to actually try to follow him. And in this world as it is, with people as we are, broken and beautiful and blessed and brutal and sick with sin and desperate for grace, to belong like we truly do to God and to each other, and to live like we're called to do, to love God and to love each other, is to open oneself to tragedy and to pain and to suffering, as well as to the liberating activity of divine love. To love another person means to risk the pain of caring about them, the risk of the pain of loss, the pain of caring for them through suffering, for them suffering, to risk the pain of caring about them when they are cruel and foolish or negligent or destructive, when they are suffering and causing suffering. To love another person means to witness someone else, others, as they are, in their full humanity and in their tragedy and in their dignity and in their deepest, truest need. To have a Christ-like heart that can break and embrace. And to grow in love for God means to grow in our capacity to recognize, even just a little, the tragedy of humanity's fall from God's good purpose, and our own capacity for what is evil and what is false, alongside our capacity for what is good and true. We can witness our own tragedy due to sin, our suffering due to sin, alongside our dignity and our blessedness. We can witness our own humanity through God's eyes and feel it all with a Christ-like heart and allow ourselves to be embraced in that Christ-like heart. And it's very humbling. It's also very ennobling. Now, Jesus gives us specific guidance about where our focus should be in this. And I recommend we take this guidance seriously. When Jesus gave this teaching about the greatest commandment, he was re-emphasizing the commandments of his ancestor Moses, as told in 2 books of the Hebrew Scriptures. The first is from and love God with your whole being, with everything you've got. And Leviticus, love your neighbor as yourself. And that commandment in Leviticus, to love your neighbor, comes as the kind of summation of a whole series of instructions in which Moses warns against exploiting and oppressing poor folks and foreigners, and against harboring hatred towards others. This is one of the good parts of Leviticus. It's worth reading the whole Bible, by the way. It really is. And so in the Gospel of Luke, when the story is told, we heard it from Matthew, and there's a variation in the Gospel of Luke. Oh, we heard it from Mark, excuse me. And there's Matthew and there's Luke. And in Luke, Jesus teaches this core commandment to love God with our whole selves and to love our neighbor as ourselves. A lawyer challenges Jesus to define neighbor. And what Luke says is he had the hope of justifying himself. Hopefully the answer is we're supposed to love those who it's easy to love anyway. That we already care about them and we're comfortable with that. And this is the story of the Good Samaritan. That's how Jesus responds, is with the story of the Good Samaritan. And the lesson of the Good Samaritan is your neighbor is whomever needs you to be their neighbor. It's not about whether they are your neighbor. It's about whether you can step up and be a good neighbor to someone who needs us to be a good neighbor to them in their time of need. And as Jesus makes clear in his life, time and time again, our attention should be especially on those who need good neighbors, who maybe are being forgotten or being left behind or trampled or expelled or facing expulsion. Jesus meant it when he said, "That which you do to the least of these, you do to me." And he modeled total identification with those who are afraid and threatened and neglected and in need, to the point that Jesus himself became a scapegoat within his society. And that's how he loved God with his whole heart and loved others as himself. So how do we live into this? Into this charge, into this challenge, into this opportunity in our day and age? And I recommend that we, as a church, take a fresh look at who needs us to be good neighbors to them. Who needs us to be good neighbors to them? And to find ways of connecting with humility and grace and learn how we can be of service. And I'm glad that we're starting this afternoon with our monthly meal at Old First. And I just invite us to ask as well, who are other neighbors of ours that need us to show up? Our core calling as Christians is the same today as it was yesterday, and it will be tomorrow. And we need to be hearing it in a fresh way. Remember our baptism vows. In Sunday school, the kids are exploring what baptism means. Do you promise, by the grace of God, to be Christ's disciple, to follow in the ways of our Savior, to follow in the ways, to resist oppression and evil, to show love and justice, and to witness to the work and the word of Jesus Christ as best as you are able? And we can say yes to this once, and our lives will be changed. And it's the practice of saying yes to this again and again and again that allows us to deepen into what it truly means to be followers of Jesus in whatever circumstances we find ourselves in. So take courage. We're not in this alone. Jesus has come before us. The saints before us have shown the way in all kinds of circumstances of life. And for all this, I give thanks to God. Thanks be to God.